DOM manipulation in React. If you think you can just use document.querySelector to select a DOM element and then manipulate it, then you might be partially correct, because doing so might make your React app slow and even give you some bugs. This is not the right way to manipulate DOM elements in React. Instead, you use useRef to reference the DOM elements, because the query selector method is a method given by the browser to manipulate the DOM, whereas the React follows a concept of virtual DOM. So it is discouraged to use query selector in React because the query selector bypasses the virtual DOM and it then gives inconsistency and bugs. Let me just show you useRef in action. So as you can see here is an app that I've built using useRef, which can also be used in real life applications also at large scale. So what's happening over here is if I uncheck and check these checkboxes, the images gets hidden or become visible. Now these checkboxes have their own state, which are checked and unchecked. So basically these checkboxes have their own state of being checked and unchecked, a boolean value. Now here I have stored this useRef value inside this JSRef variable, and I am also referencing this DOM element by making this ref attribute equal to JSRef. Now doing this is completely correct because the rendering of this component does not depend upon this value of this DOM element. So inside this function handle click, you may see that I am using this jsref.current. So what is jsref.current? Well, every time we reference a value, we get an object as a return value which has a current property, and that current property actually contains a lot of methods and functions. So if I just console log this jsref, you might be able to see the current property. So let's just reload it. Let's do this. Console, click. Now as you can see, we have an object which has this current property. If I open this, you can see inside this current property, we actually have this. Let me just shift to VS Code to show you actually what's the return output, because I think this is something happening due to code sandbox. So as you can see that we are here in my VS Code, and let me just open the console over here. So right now it's empty. Correct. Let's just click on this and see. You can see I'm getting the object with this current property, and if I just drop down this thing, and then if I drop down this thing, then you can see that we have a lot of properties, a lot of methods. So yeah, basically I just wanted you to see this. That's why I shifted on VS Code. Well, useRef can also be used in some other scenario also, because useRef is used to reference a value that's not needed for rendering. Let's say in case of an app where you want to keep account of how many times your component has rendered. So in that app, you will use useRef. Let me just show you and then I'll explain it later. So as I said, in case of a scenario where you want to keep account of how many times your component has rendered, I've created an app which does the same job. So in this app, the value inside this input is actually the state of the component. I'm using this onChange property to update the state, that is this name, using this setName function which we get from useState. So let me just show you. Well, I've written this I guess 20 times. So whenever the state has changed, this render count value is actually increased by 1, which shows me that I have rendered this component actually 20 times. So now you may ask why I'm using this render count.current. Well, as I previously said, we actually get an object with a current property whenever we use this useRef. So let me just show you by consoling this render count variable. So actually I was facing some issues in code sandbox. So that's why I've shifted over here to VS Code. So here you can see that if I open the console, let me just reload it. Yeah, so as you can see inside this console, the value of current was actually 0 initially, and then when this component rendered, it became 1. And now if I change this, this will become this 12. See, it has become 12. So you may ask that, hey, can we use useState for the same job? We can just set the counter variable as the state of the component, use the set counter function to update the value of counter variable every time the component renders using this use effect hook. Well, no, you cannot do that, because if we do that, we will be stuck in an infinite loop, because what will happen then is when the component renders, the state, which is actually this value of this input, will change, and when the component will change, it will re-render. So when the component re-renders, the state will again change, and then this will happen again and again, and this set counter function will again and again just change the value of this counter variable, and hence we'll be stuck inside an infinite loop, and eventually we will run out of memory and the app will crash. So let me just uncomment these things, because I have written these actually to show you what will happen if we do these kind of mistakes. Let me just reload it. Now we can see this is using useRef, and this is using the state. Let me just comment this and uncomment this. Now let me just uncomment this. You can see we are stuck inside an infinite loop. This value continuously increases and increases, and eventually I will run out of memory. So let me just stop it. So yeah, you can see our component has rendered this many times, and I have not written anything inside this. So using useState actually makes us run out of memory. So that's why we use useRef, because the useRef is actually used to reference a value that's not needed for rendering, whereas useState, it completely depends upon rendering of a component, right? So yeah, this is it for this video. I hope you understood useRef. So if you didn't understand what I was talking about, because I have also used useState and useEffect, so you may check out those videos over here.